My name is Alexis Carter. I'm 34 years old, and I used to be known as Mrs. Gabriel Davis, the quiet interior designer wife of Boston's rising architect star. People saw me as the elegant woman behind his success, the one who hosted flawless dinner parties and gave up her own career for his ambitions. I thought I knew my place in life until the day he and his friends left me stranded in a small Italian town after an argument. As I stood there alone, dust settling around me, something inside me cracked open. Maybe being lost in a foreign country was exactly what I needed to finally find myself. I sat on the cold stone bench outside that cafe long after Gabriel's laughter had died away. An interior designer who had created beautiful spaces but had somehow forgotten to create his own life. The sun set behind the terracotta roofs, casting long shadows on the narrow street, and with each passing shadow, the reality of what had happened pressed harder on my chest. He left me, not just after a fight he drove off with his friends laughing, leaving me stranded in a town I couldn't even pronounce. At first, I believed he would come back. He always came back after his cruel jokes, brushing them off with a smirk and a kiss, calling me oversensitive for not laughing along. But as dusk turned to night, something in me changed. It felt like a slow crack in marble, silent, irreversible. The phone vibrated in my hand, but it wasn't him. Only the low battery warning flashed like my own fading self-esteem. I checked my wallet, 80 euros, no cards. He'd taken them earlier to keep them safe. As I turned to my evening purse, a loving husband. I forced myself to my feet. My legs were numb, my body both light and heavy. The locals at the coffee tables murmured in Italian, their eyes following me, with a mixture of curiosity and pity. As I dragged my suitcase down the cobblestone street, the wheels clicking like bones on stone, I found a dark hostel with peeling paint and a flashing neon sign. The old woman at the front desk spoke no English, but when I slipped coins into her hand and touched my chest, she understood. Her eyes softened with maternal sadness as she handed me a tarnished brass key. Inside the room, yellow bulbs flickered on the cracked walls. The bed creaked under my trembling weight. I sat there staring at my wedding ring, 2 carats of icy perfection. Gabriel had upgraded it on our 5th anniversary, slipping it onto my finger with the words, "You finally look like my wife." I remember laughing, thinking it was a compliment. Tonight I saw it for what it was, a necklace disguised as gold. Sleep came like a hunted animal, fitful. I woke every hour with a pounding heart, checking my phone for missed calls. Nothing. By dawn, the last remnants of hope had rotted inside me. Gabriel wouldn't be coming back. Not to this room. Not me. I showered in warm, rusty water and clung to the sink as nausea churned in my stomach. I saw myself in the cracked mirror, my eyes puffy, my hair disheveled, my makeup smeared down my cheeks, like the war paint of a defeated man. And then, in that filthy motel bathroom, something suddenly rose inside me. Anger, yes. Grief, yes. But underneath it all, a small flickering spark of freedom. He thought I would beg. That I would call my parents, call his assistant, call someone to take me home so he could cherish my humiliation like a trophy. But I didn't. Instead, I packed my things, stuffed the diamond ring into my pocket, and stepped out into the cool Italian morning. The bus stop was nearly deserted, silent except for the cooing of doves overhead. I traded the ring in at a dusty pawn shop for a fraction of its value. The man behind the glass didn't care about my tears. He just saw a stone to resell. I left with enough euros to catch the first bus out of town. As the bus passed fields of dying sunflowers and crumbling stone villas, I pressed my forehead against the glass and let the tears flow without wiping them away. Each tear felt like a stripping away of the woman I had been the quiet, well-groomed wife who fit perfectly into Gabriel's world. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew that for the first time in years, my life was in my hands. At a transit station near the coast, I saw a sign, "Ferry to Greece." My chest tightened. Greece. A country I had dreamed of as a student, but Gabriel had dismissed as too cliché. The decision was immediate and primal. I bought a ticket, boarded the ferry, and watched Italy dissolve into mist. By the time I arrived, dawn was breaking over the whitewashed villages clinging to the cliffs, the sea below turning indigo and turquoise. I stepped onto Greek soil with a suitcase, a dead phone, and no plans. But as I walked through winding alleys perfumed with baking bread and wild thyme, I felt air filling my lungs in a way it hadn't in years. Gabriel's absence no longer felt like a gaping wound. It felt like space. I didn't know then that I would meet Elena and Nikos, or that their olive farm would become my salvation. I didn't know my hands would blister harvesting olives, or that I'd wake to roosters instead of alarm clocks set for other people's demands. I didn't know I'd find myself kneading bread at dawn, learning to knit by candlelight, or discovering the softness in my voice again as I spoke in broken Greek. All I knew as I stood on a dusty road with olive trees shimmering silver green around me was that I had been abandoned as a punishment, but instead I had been set free. I woke up on a thin mattress laid out on the stone floor, the smell of herbs and wood smoke filling the dark room. For a moment I didn't know where I was. Then the memories rushed back: the ferry, the blistering walk through olive groves, and finally the collapse beneath a silver-leaved tree. Elena found me. Her voice was the first sound I heard, as consciousness fluttered back like a torn flag in the wind. She spoke rapid Greek, her words flowing over me like water. I understood nothing except that her hands were kind. She half carried me up the hill to her farmhouse, her small frame surprisingly strong, as I leaned heavily against her. Inside the kitchen was dim lit only by a single bulb and the embers of an old stove. Dried oregano and lavender hung in bundles from the beams, perfuming the air with earthy sweetness. She settled me at a rough wooden table, pressing a chipped mug into my trembling hands. Water. Then soup, simple and steaming, with garlic, lemon, and dill. Each sip revived something small and dying inside me. A man entered, older, with thick brows and a silver mustache. Nikos. He eyed me warily at first, then nodded once as if accepting my presence. They spoke over me in short, clipped sentences, their voices weaving around my exhaustion, until I drifted into sleep. That night I slept without nightmares. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't haunted by Gabriel's laughter or the cold emptiness of an Italian pensione. Instead, I felt wrapped in the quiet hum of a place where life moved to ancient rhythms. Olive trees sighing under moonlight, cicadas singing in the dark. Morning came with roosters crowing and sunlight spilling gold across the tile floor. I woke to find clean clothes folded at my feet. A faded cotton dress decades old, but soft and freshly laundered. Elena beamed when I emerged, placing a rough hand on my cheek, before handing me bread still warm, from the oven drizzled with sharp green olive oil and wild honey. At first, I resisted their care. Pride burned hot inside me. I wasn't a stray to be pitied, but each time I tried to leave packing my few belongings into my worn suitcase, Elena would simply shake her head and press food into my hands. Stay. She'd say one of the few English words she knew. Rest. And so I stayed. Each day began before dawn. Elena woke me with a gentle touch on my shoulder, handing me sturdy boots and a wool shawl to wrap against the early chill. Together we stepped out into a world still hushed with darkness, stars fading overhead as the sky blushed with coming light. In the groves, Nikos showed me how to rake olives from the branches without damaging the trees. My city-soft hands blistered and bled. The first time I cried out, dropping the wooden rake, he clicked his tongue softly and took my palm in his rough fingers. Tomorrow better, he promised. And he was right. Each day my grip grew stronger, my muscles less prone to trembling exhaustion. At noon, Elena would spread a cloth under the olive trees and unpack lunch bread, goat cheese, wrapped in vine leaves, tomatoes still warm from the sun. We ate in silence, listening to the wind whisper through silver leaves above us. I learned their language slowly, word by stumbling word. Elena was patient, repeating phrases until they sank into my bones. Nikos teased me when I mispronounced things, his gruff laughter warming rather than wounding. At night, I sat by the stove as Elena knitted. She taught me, her gnarled fingers guiding mine until I could make clumsy rows of stitches. My first scarf was crooked, uneven, pathetic in its childish imperfection. But Alina held it up, eyes shining. "Good," she said softly. "Yours." That word lodged in my chest like a thorn and a balm, all at once. Mine. This life, these aching muscles, these warm meals, these simple kindnesses. They were mine. Gabriel's world had been curated perfection. Marble counters, steel fixtures, sleek lines, muted palettes. But it was cold. Here nothing matched. Plates were chipped walls, stained with years of smoke sheets, rough with line-dried salt. Yet warmth radiated from everything. One evening, as the sun burned itself out behind distant hills, Elena brought out an old photograph album. Black and white photos of her wedding, her parents, a daughter, with Elena's eyes and Nikos' smile. "Sophia," she whispered, touching the face. Then she pointed far away. "Australia." I understood then. Their daughter had left, emigrated, started her own life, oceans away. A grandchild I'd never meet. Their quiet acceptance of my presence was not charity. It was something deeper, the healing of old grief through new love. Weeks passed. My body changed, softer in some places, harder in others. I woke each morning with olive oil on my fingertips and slept each night with the ache of honest labor in my bones. And slowly, without meaning to, I began to forgive myself. Not Gabriel, he didn't deserve forgiveness, but myself. For the years I wasted waiting for love to feel like love. For the dignity I traded away piece by piece, for believing that survival was the same as living. One morning, as I raked olives into nets under a sky so blue, it hurt to look at Elena called out to me. I turned, sweat dripping into my eyes, and she was smiling. She tapped her chest, then mine. "Family," she said. And for the first time in my life, hearing that word didn't feel like a burden I had to earn. It felt like a gift I had already become. 3 months had passed since I arrived in this village of olive trees and stone houses. 3 months of dawn harvests, aching muscles and quiet dinners by candlelight. 3 months of learning to breathe again. Then one humid afternoon, while I was sorting olives with Elena under the pergola, my old phone buzzed violently in my apron pocket. I froze. I hadn't heard its vibration in weeks, having kept it powered off, hidden away like a relic of my past life. My hands trembled as I turned it over. "Gabriel." The subject line of the email read, "I know where you are." My chest tightened as if someone had bound it with wire. The message was short, curt, written in the commanding tone he reserved for subordinates and wives, Alexis. "Enough. I've hired a PI. I know you're in Greece living with some old peasants. I'm coming to bring you home. This childish tantrum ends now. I land Thursday. Be ready." I read it again and again, each time feeling nausea rise higher in my throat, my vision blurred with rage. He called my liberation a tantrum, my survival childish. Even now he believed my existence was his to retrieve at will, like lost luggage, waiting in an airport office. "Bad news?" Elena asked softly, seeing my face drain of blood. I handed her the phone. She read the message in silence, eyes narrowing. "He's coming here," she asked. I nodded, too choked to speak. She placed the phone down, her weathered hand covering mine with firm warmth. Then we prepare. That evening, Nikos brought out a bottle of tsipuro and poured 3 small glasses. We sat under the grapevine canopy, the late summer breeze brushing against our sunburned skin. "What will you do?" Nikos asked in his slow, careful English. I looked out across the grove, the moon, illuminating silver leaves like shields. "I don't know," I whispered. Part of me wants to run again. But another part is tired of running. Elena sipped her drink and said nothing, but her eyes gleamed with quiet pride. Thursday arrived heavy with heat. Cicadas shrilled in the fields as I pressed oil samples with Nikos in the small bottling shed. That's when I heard the car, sleek, modern, out of place, among donkey carts and rusted farm trucks. The low hum of entitlement rolled up the dirt path and stopped near the house. I stepped out into the blinding sun, my heart drumming against my ribs so hard I thought it would break free. Gabriel stood beside a silver Mercedes rental sunglasses perched on his sculpted nose, sleeves rolled neatly to reveal his tanned forearms. He looked the same, hair perfectly styled, watch gleaming shoes that had never touched soil before today. For a moment, neither of us spoke. His eyes flicked over me, narrowing at my sun-darkened skin, my hair tied back with a frayed cloth, my work apron stained with oil and dirt. I saw the calculation in his gaze, measuring how far I'd fallen from his standards. "My God, Alexis," he said, voice dripping with controlled disgust. "What have you done to yourself?" I stood tall despite my shaking knees. "I've been working." He gave a humorless laugh. "Working, picking olives, with peasants, living like this." He gestured around at the farmhouse, the trees, the drying laundry swaying on the line. "It's time to go home. Pack your things." I let his words settle between us, heavy and cold like iron chains. Then I shook my head slowly. "No." His face darkened, jaw clenching so tightly, I saw the muscles jump. "No." "What do you mean, no?" "This is done. Your little rebellion ends today." I stepped forward until I was close enough to see the pores on his perfect skin, smell the subtle aftershave he wore every day since college. "I'm not going anywhere with you, Gabriel. This isn't rebellion. This is freedom." His eyes narrowed further. Freedom, living like a migrant worker, washing in a stone basin, wearing rags. "You're my wife. You belong with me. I don't belong to you," I said softly but firmly. "You left me, on a street in Italy. Do you remember that? Your friends laughing as you drove away? You abandoned me." He scoffed. "Stop being dramatic." "It was a mistake, Alexis. A joke that went too far." "I've apologized. No, Gabriel." My voice shook, not with fear, but with rising power. "You didn't apologize. You hired a private investigator to drag me back. You called me childish. You called this life pathetic." He threw his arms wide. "Look around you, Alexis. You're hauling baskets of olives for pennies. You used to host events for CEOs and senators. You wore couture. Now you look like this." I glanced down at myself, at my blistered hands strong and rough from work, at my forearms tanned from weeks under sun, at my legs muscled from climbing terraces and carrying harvests. Then I looked back into his eyes and saw for the first time not the man I loved, but a small frightened boy trapped in a polished shell. "I like who I am now," I said. "I like my work. I like my life." He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a growl. "You are my wife, Alexis. You took vows. You can't just disappear and become this. You're coming home with me. Today." Behind me, I heard Elena approach. She stood at my shoulder, silent but unyielding, Nikos appeared too, gripping his cane like a weapon if needed. Gabriel glanced at them with thinly veiled contempt. "They can't protect you forever," he sneered. "You think you're safe here. You have no money, no real skills, no." I cut him off by pulling a folded document from my apron pocket and holding it out to him. Divorce papers, signed by me, ready to file. His eyes widened as he snatched the papers from my hand, scanning them with trembling fingers. "You're divorcing me." His voice cracked on the last word. "Yes," I whispered, "I am." "You'll regret this." He spat his face, flushing with rage. "When this little fantasy falls apart and you're left with nothing, you'll come crawling back, and I won't be there." A strange, peaceful smile spread across my lips. "That's the point, Gabrielle. I don't ever want you there again." He stared at me, at Elena, at Nikos, then back at me. I saw something break behind his eyes, not love but ownership. Realization dawned that he no longer possessed me. I had slipped from his grip like oil through an open palm. Without another word, he turned sharply, climbed into his car, and drove away down the dusty road, leaving only swirling gravel and the taste of relief in the hot summer air. Elena's hand pressed against my back. Nikos grunted approval. I watched the silver car disappear among the olive trees and felt something loosen in my chest. I was free, not because Gabrielle left, but because this time I chose to stay. Gabriel left like a sudden summer storm, violent, loud, but in the end leaving only clearer skies behind. I stood watching the dust settle on the dirt road between olive trees, listening to the cicadas return to their song, feeling the silence wrap around my chest like armor. Elena laid her hand on my shoulder and squeezed gently. No words were needed. Nikos tapped his cane against the ground with finality. "It's done, Alexis. Now live." In the days that followed, I worked with a different kind of strength. No longer as a refugee in my own life, but as a builder. I learned Nikos's ledger system, his handwritten scrawls on old paper, and began entering them into spreadsheets on the beat-up laptop I'd bought with my first earnings from the market stall. Elena taught me to sort olives by ripeness and texture, to smell the oil and detect notes of grass or almond or pepper. I learned from the dirt under my nails and the resin that stained my skin. At night, after dinners of olives, fresh bread, and goat cheese, I sat at the wooden table under the dim bulb, sketching the first designs for our olive oil labels. For the first time in years, I wasn't a designer bending to wealthy clients' tastes. I was giving soul to my own product. I drew the rounded olive leaves, the twisted trunks like Nikos's strong arms, Elena's rough hands, and finally myself hair-tied back with a cloth, holding a basket of olives under the unforgiving Mediterranean sun. 3 months after Gabriel left, our new brand was born, Sophia's Grove. I named it to honor Elena and Nikos's daughter, who had emigrated to Australia, leaving behind a quiet ache in their eyes. When I told Elena, I said, "Your daughter may be far away, but her name will stay here on every bottle traveling the world." Elena wept. Nikos only nodded, eyes shimmering with tears, but his smile glowed with pride. I reached out to local restaurants, designed flyers in Greek and English, and photographed every part of the process for a small Instagram page I created with a bio that read, "Extra virgin olive oil, made with sweat, sun, and rebirth." The first message came from a chef in Athens asking for a 50-bottle order. My hands shook as I typed my reply, not with fear, but with a fierce thrill that burned bright in my chest. This wasn't just an order. It was proof that I, Alexis Carter, once discarded like trash on an Italian roadside, was now the owner of something real. On the last market day before winter, I stood beside Elena and Nikos under our faded canvas tarp. Villagers, tourists, city chefs stopped by to sample the oil. Some frowned in thought, tasted again, and nodded, placing bills into Elena's tin cash box. As dusk fell, and we packed away the empty crates, I caught my reflection in the dusty window of a parked van. There I was, tanned hair tied back with olive oil stains on my aproned cheeks, hollowed from months of honest labor. And I smiled, because in that reflection for the first time in years, I saw a woman I respected. That night, after counting the day's earnings, Nikos laid his rough hand on mine. He spoke slowly, in newly learned English Alexis, and Sophia, gone. You here. You are daughter now. Elena nodded, tears bright in her eyes. I bent forward, letting silent sobs shake through my chest, tears dripping onto his calloused fingers. Not tears of pain or fear, but of a peace so deep it felt like the ocean. I still haven't called Boston. I'm not sure I ever will. Boston is now a shadow behind me, glittering parties with hollow conversations, cold embraces, dresses that cost more than a month's groceries here, but never warmed my skin with pride. I choose to stay. I choose to wake to rooster calls and knead basil leaves into warm bread at dawn. I choose to rake olives under the burning Mediterranean sun, my hands blistered and strong, my lungs filled with earth and salt air. Because Gabriel thought he broke me when he abandoned me on that roadside. But in truth, he only stripped away the last chain, revealing who I was all along. And now, as I pack each crate of olive oil, placing the Sophia's Grove label with Alexis Carter, co-owner and designer printed at the bottom, I know I have not only found a new job, a new land, I have found my truest self, the woman Gabriel could never own, and no one will ever dim again. The first week was brutal. My hands blistered so badly from raking olives that blood stained the wooden handle. Nikos merely nodded as if to say, "Good. Now you're learning." Elena would take my palms in her small, strong hands each night, rubbing thick herbal salve into the torn skin. Her touch burned at first, then cooled, leaving behind a pulsing ache that felt alive. I learned to wake before dawn, when the olive groves were nothing but dark silhouettes against the indigo sky. My body resisted at first, aching thighs from climbing terraces, shoulders screaming from hauling baskets, forearms burning with new muscle. Each day I felt weaker, but somehow each morning I woke up stronger. When the harvest paused during midday heat, Elena pulled me into her kitchen. There I learned to knead dough until my arms shook, folded into soft golden loaves, and brushed them with fresh olive oil and wild rosemary. She taught me how to stuff grape leaves with rice and lemon, how to roast lamb with only salt and thyme until the bones fell clean. She never measured anything, never consulted a recipe. Her memory was her recipe book, and her instincts were her scales. At night, under the flickering bulb in the living room, she taught me to knit. My stitches were uneven, sloppy, riddled with mistakes. I cursed under my breath, ready to throw the needles across the room, but Elena only smiled softly and said, "Mistakes keep us humble." Sometimes when the kitchen work was done and the air outside still warm, Nikos would take me to his pottery wheel under the pergola. His thick hands guided mine as the clay spun and wobbled, coaxing shapes from trembling fingers. My first mug collapsed into a lopsided ruin, but I fired it anyway, glaze dripping down like tears. I drank coffee from it each morning, a reminder that usefulness is never defined by perfection. My body transformed. I grew thinner but harder muscles roped along my arms and calves, my stomach flat from hours bent over harvest crates. My skin darkened under the relentless Mediterranean sun, and the expensive creams and makeup I once clung to sat untouched in my suitcase. When I glimpsed myself in the shard of mirror nailed to the stone bathroom wall, I saw someone wild and fierce staring back, someone Gabriel would no longer recognize. But the change wasn't just physical. Here I wasn't a silent ornament or the background support to someone else's spotlight. I was a worker among workers. My hands turned soil and harvested olives beside Nikos. My voice mixed flour and oil beside Elena. At the market, I stood proudly behind our bottles, explaining the flavors to customers in halting Greek, their eyes lighting up when they tasted the richness. I wasn't just learning skills. I was being rewoven into the fabric of a real community. Here I was no longer Gabrielle's wife or the woman who left Boston. I was Alexis worker, designer, student teacher, daughter by choice. I was shelling peas with Elena under the broad shade of the old fig tree when my phone buzzed against the weathered wooden table. The sound startled me, a jarring intrusion into the world I had so carefully built here. A world of olive branches and bread ovens, donkey carts creaking down sunburnt roads, and quiet evenings lit only by lantern glow and drifting bougainvillea petals. I hadn't powered it on in weeks. There had been no reason to. Each email, each notification from Boston felt like a tether to a life I no longer recognized as mine. My heart stuttered in my chest as the screen lit up. Gabriel Davis. The name alone sent a ripple of cold dread flooding my veins, metallic and sharp coiling in my gut. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the message icon. My breath caught somewhere between ribs and throat. Finally, with trembling fingers, I swiped open the screen. Alexis, enough. I've hired a PI. I know you're in Greece living with old peasants. This tantrum ends now. I'm coming to bring you home. I land Thursday. Be ready. I read it again. And again. Each word slammed into me like a hammer, designed to nail me back into the narrow box he had spent years building around my life. Tantrum. Peasants. Bring you home? For a long moment, the world around me went silent. The only sound was the rush of blood in my ears pulsing with betrayal, rage, and something else I couldn't yet name. The gentle breeze rustled the fig leaves overhead, dappling sunlight across my bare arms, and the baskets of bright green peas piled between us. Elena paused her work, her weathered fingers stilling mid-shell. Her dark eyes framed by crow's feet, etched deep from decades of laughter and sorrow, flicked to my face. Bad news from America, she asked in halting, careful English. I couldn't find words. My tongue felt heavy, frozen in my mouth. I handed her the phone, my hand trembling, as I pressed it into her calloused palm. She read the message slowly, her eyes narrowing, her mouth pressing into a thin, hard line of quiet fury. When she finished, she laid the phone gently back into my hand and covered it with hers, warm, dry, strong. Fear, she asked softly, her voice low and calm, slicing through my haze like a blade wrapped in linen. I sat there staring at the glowing screen, my chest heaving with ragged, shallow breaths. Hot tears welled in my eyes, spilling over in silent rivulets down my sunburnt cheeks. But beneath the rising panic, something shifted. Something deeper than anger, deeper than grief. Something solid, something unbreakable. I inhaled slowly, the scent of crushed pea pods and dry earth filling my lungs. My shoulders drew back, my spine straightened, and with a trembling exhale, I whispered, surprising even myself. No, I'm not afraid, because I wasn't. Not really. Shock? Yes. Anger? Absolutely. But fear. Fear had lost its power over me somewhere between learning how to knead dough with Elena's strong hands guiding mine and shaping clay on the pottery wheel, feeling the earth spin steady beneath my palms. Gabriel's words no longer wrapped around my chest like chains. His threats no longer reached the deep parts of me where his power once lived. I wiped my tears away with the back of my wrist, smearing dirt and salt across my cheekbones. Elena watched me, eyes bright with approval. She nodded once firmly, as though my answer had confirmed something she already knew. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead gently to mine, her hair smelling of rosemary, ash, and sun. Her voice was low but strong as iron as she pulled back and said simply, "We prepare." Then she rose to gather the baskets, her shoulders broad beneath her faded cotton dress, moving with the quiet, unstoppable certainty of mountains. I sat for a moment longer, feeling the breeze lift strands of my hair from my damp face, feeling my heart settle into a new, steady rhythm. The woman Gabriel left behind on that street in Italy was gone, and the woman waiting for him in Greece would not be taken anywhere she didn't choose. That evening, the sky burned crimson as the sun melted behind the rolling hills, bleeding streaks of fire across the olive groves and stone terraces. The kitchen windows glowed with molten light, illuminating motes of flour dust, drifting in the warm air like tiny golden spirits. I sat at the old oak table, my phone screen, a pale glow in the encroaching twilight, Gabriel's email open before me like an unholy scripture. My pulse thundered in my veins, but beneath the adrenaline and trembling fury, something new and immovable settled in my chest, a quiet certainty hard and sharp as forged steel. Eleanor and Nikos sat across from me, their faces shadowed by the dying sun. They exchanged silent glances, an entire conversation passing between them in a single flick of her eyes, a shift in his heavy shoulders. Finally, Nikos cleared his throat, his rough hands fiddling with a folded envelope, stained with olive oil fingerprints. The clock on the stone wall ticked softly, marking time between heartbeats. Elena reached across the table and laid her warm, calloused palm over mine. Her touch steadied me, rooting me back into the chair, into this house, into this life I had begun to claim. "Alexis," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion that tightened my throat. "We need to talk." Nikos slid the envelope across the table, its edge snagged on the worn wood, whispering against the grains. My fingers shook as I picked it up, expecting bills or paperwork about the olive harvest. But inside were official documents, printed on heavy white paper, written first in Greek, then translated into careful, blocky English below. I scanned the lines, each word sharpening into focus, like a lens being adjusted. Partnership agreement, 1/3 ownership, effective immediately. My chest tightened. I looked up at them, my vision flickering between their familiar, beloved faces. "What is this?" I whispered, my voice cracking under the weight of disbelief. Nikos's lined face remained unreadable, but his dark eyes held something fierce and unyielding. Elena squeezed my hand tighter, tears welling in her eyes until they slipped down her cheeks, leaving clean paths through the olive oil smudges on her skin. "Business is yours too now," she said, her voice breaking into a watery laugh. "Not just work, not just help. Yours. You stay. You build with us. Family." The word family cracked something open inside me. My throat closed around a sob so fierce it hurt to swallow. Why I managed to choke out my voice, thin and shaking. "Why would you do this for me?" Elena's gaze sharpened, then flinty with a quiet, protective rage I had only ever seen in mothers defending their children from wolves at the door. "Because that man," she said each word, dropping into the silent kitchen like iron weights, "does not get to decide your life. Not anymore." She tapped the papers firmly with her forefinger, leaving faint crescent prints of olive oil on the pristine sheets. Here she said, her voice low and final, echoing off the stone walls and into the marrow of my bones. "You are free. You are equal. You are home." Tears blurred my vision completely then. The words on the page melted into meaningless rivers of ink, but I didn't need to read them again. I understood them with every beat of my heart, every exhale of breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for years. In Boston, I was Gabriel's shadow, a polished accessory meant to reflect his light back at him. In Italy, I was his discarded inconvenience, an afterthought, rotting in the sun. But here in this farmhouse that smelled of thyme wood smoke and pressed olives, I was a partner, a builder, a woman with her own name, her own work, her own power. Elena rose from her chair and came to me, cupping my tear-streaked face between her weathered hands. Her palms were warm and rough, etched with decades of labor and love. She pressed her forehead to mine, her hair smelling of rosemary, earth, and ash. "You choose now, Alexis," she whispered, her voice shaking with fierce certainty. "Always. No man will ever own your freedom again." And as she kissed my forehead, sealing her words into my skin, I felt something settle deep within me, a rootedness so complete it almost buckled my knees. For the first time since I boarded that ferry to Greece, leaving behind a life of silent submission, I felt not just free, but anchored, rooted like the ancient olive trees surrounding this house, silent, patient, unbreakable. The day he arrived was searing hot, the kind of heat that pressed down on the valley like a living thing. Cicadas screamed from the olive trees, their song rising and falling in a relentless chorus that pulsed through the dry, shimmering air. I was bent over a basket of freshly harvested fruit sweat, dripping down my spine, staining the back of my cotton dress in dark streaks. The scent of crushed olives and sun-baked earth filled my lungs, grounding me in a place I had come to love with an ache as deep as bone. I heard his car before I saw it, the low, smug hum of a rented black Mercedes creeping up the dirt road, tires crunching the gravel like brittle bones underfoot. I didn't straighten right away. I savored the last few seconds of peace before his shadow fell across my world again. Finally, I stood wiping my forehead with the back of my wrist, leaving a smear of oil and dust across my brow. Nikos emerged from the house, his massive hands wiping flour from his apron. Elena followed her eyes, narrowed, her mouth set in a thin, grim line. The car door swung open, and there he was, Gabriel. Standing tall and pristine in tailored cream chinos and a crisp white linen shirt sleeves, rolled just so sunglasses perched on his aquiline nose. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine, untouched by the dust swirling around his ankles. He looked impossibly clean in this land of sweat dirt and sunburnt skin, a porcelain statue in a temple of living stone. For a moment he just stared at me, stared at. His gaze flicked over my scuffed boots, my sun-darkened arms, the loose cotton dress stained with oil and earth. His lip curled with contempt. "My God, Alexis." He drawled, his voice dripping disgust and disbelief. "Look at you." He stepped closer, lowering his sunglasses to pin me with those pale blue eyes that once made my knees tremble. Now they only made my stomach twist with cold certainty. "You're really going to throw it all away for this?" He scoffed, gesturing with a broad sweep of his manicured hand at the groves, the farmhouse, the distant sea, glinting like molten silver under the noon sun. "Boston, your reputation, money, status, for what to become? What exactly?" "A farmer." His tone was poison-laced, honey-heavy with mockery, and the arrogant certainty of a man who believed he was the axis around which all lives revolved. I let his words hang in the blistering silence, the cicadas pausing their song, as if to listen. Then slowly, I reached into my apron pocket and pulled out the folded papers I had carried for this moment. My hands didn't shake as I stepped forward and held them out to him. He frowned, irritation flickering across his face as he snatched them from my hand. His eyes darted over the header, and I watched as comprehension dawned sharp and ugly. Divorce agreement. His jaw clenched so tight a vein pulsed at his temple. "What the hell is this?" He hissed, his voice a snake striking in the quiet grove. "Alexis, be serious." I said softly, my voice low but unbreakable. "For the first time in years, I am deadly serious." He crumpled the papers in his fist, his eyes blazing with fury. "You think you can survive without me? without my money, my protection. This is childish, Alexis. You're having some midlife crisis fantasy in Greece. But eventually reality will hit. I smiled then, a small sad smile, but behind it was steel. You're right, Gabriel, I whispered. Reality has hit. The reality that I don't need you, that I never did. His face darkened thunderclouds rolling behind his eyes. After everything I gave you, this is how you repay me. You were nothing before me. I tilted my head, studying his sculpted jawline, his flawless skin, his perfectly ironed shirt, every piece of him, so meticulously curated.